Well, Mark, thank you for agreeing to talk with us today. So I have a couple of questions I would like to talk with you about based on your background and experience in healthcare. And so the first question is, what do you see as the top technology trend impacting healthcare providers today?
That's an easy one, Melissa. And by the way, it is good to be with you today, too. It feels like maybe today, being 2019, that I can be talking about 2018 or 2017 or 2016 or all the way back to 2000 and even earlier. These are trends where I see technology really making a difference. And you're going to understand as I go through it. The first is merger and acquisitions. And I know this is technology focused, so stay with me. And the second is innovation. Both of those sound pretty harmless words, but they're devilish in what impact they can have on health systems and health plans. And going back to M&A or merger and acquisitions, to me, as I read and track clients and from my past work experience, it's occurring every week within the healthcare vertical. Convergence and collaboration between health systems and plans, to me, it remains an obvious imperative. From an IT perspective, I still have the sense, I had it firsthand, and I have it at working with clients in their view of challenges for IT to be at that strategic table when mergers and acquisitions are being discussed. That has to change. And now a trend with technology, it is so pervasive, maybe sometimes invasive, but so pervasive with technology. And the investments for these organizations when an M&A situation occurs, it's tremendous. So to me, a smart and well-run HIT organization can go backwards during M&A as the orgs merge their platforms, applications, staffing. And in the language of backwards, I mean, their budgets are getting greater and bigger, so there's fat and waste and duplicate costs in there. Their number of applications have increased, so they're gone backwards. Everyone should be trying to hone in on their portfolio and not have 20 of every kind of application within healthcare IT. And then the support then for these apps and the environment, the staffing strategies with each organization can be pretty wildly different. And that shouldn't be surprising because they're bringing together perhaps distinct cultures. But you have the people element in it as well. So I've experienced M&A at a large system. I've done it in Texas regionally. And so to me, it's a real business imperative. Today, though, it feels more urgent. Just again, from what I'm reading, and some of the bedfellows that are popping up and out within M&A are eye-rubbing. And I'm not yet even thinking about what would Apple do if they bought a hospital system or Amazon, is that far-fetched? I don't think so. So technology, again, is impacted by this trend of mergers and acquisitions, and it shakes these organizations to their core, all in the spirit of looking to collaborate and converge. And if IT's not in the front of it with it, that could just make the trend even more difficult for the technology base. The second one, Melissa, is real quick here is innovation. To me, and Melissa, you know me, but some words are just overused, and innovation is one. And so I slowed down, and why would I call that out as a trend for technology? And here's why. The definition of innovation is simply the introduction of something new or a change made to an existing ideal product field. And in our case, innovating with technology. And I would argue that we're innovating every day. And for me, here's an easy parallel for me to use and an example of this overused phrase, innovation. And so stay with me, Melissa. But the first one is the telephone was an invention. It didn't exist, so it was invented. Years later comes by, the first cell phone was an innovation to the phone. The smart one was a further innovation. And now here Apple is saying it needs to innovate the iPhone. That's the exact quote. So what is that? What's going to be next? We think, and there's a chip, and there goes our thoughts into each other's heads, and how do you control that? I don't know. I'll stop with that. But when I think about healthcare IT, about all these new phones, metaphorically with my storyline about innovation, but then literally, physically, there are so many smartphones everywhere in health systems. They're everywhere. How do you innovate? How do you move forward with advancements such as blockchain, machine learning, data? I just say anything data, the Internet of Things. To me now that sounds so old, just that language. But think about the medical equipment and devices and what I've just been describing, cybersecurity and AI, and the list goes on. How does the CIO stay up on top of all of this innovation world? How does the CIO support an organization when they have business leaders and pressing strategies where innovation would help them move forward. And to me, it's just a big darn deal. So in summary, when I thought about the trends, I did land on M&A and innovation. Older trends, maybe they'll just never go away, Melissa. I don't know that they'll disappear. Period.
Okay.
That's what I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Mark. And so along that same lines, as you mentioned some of the challenges that CIOs have today in terms of how does a CIO respond to business challenges that arise around use, and I'll use the word innovative in air quotes, innovative technologies such as blockchain and AI and automation and, right? You can fill in the blank.
Right.
So I'm going to pose that question back to you. How do CIOs, in your experience as a former CIO of a large health system, as well as in your current role as an executive advisor and consultant, how do they deal with those big technology challenges? What sort of advice would you give to a CIO today in dealing with these technology challenges?
One language is around governance, language I would use for an organization to actually create doesn't have to be a giant council, but a small group that is commissioned, chartered to think about innovation and how that would be broadly impacting a healthcare system or a health plan, whatever the organization is, but through governance and how you, through the charter process, through funding, through how extravagant you want to be, that's up to you. But to have a forum where creative, new, innovative ideas, applications, strategies, relationships can be brought into an environment and tracked and not get mucked up with the comprehensive health record or the ERP implementation or this giant infrastructure or this medium-sized infrastructure environment that you have to, or cybersecurity. Innovation, it will occur in all of those things I just mentioned, but it can get so caught up in an organization size or grappling with new ideas that they're not tracked, they're not checked, it's not done in a sanctioned way. There should be a report into the board about innovation for within an organization and how it is being managed. And I think as CIOs that is in the right seat to understand the business, and also with all these technology coming at them, the strings that you and I have, advancements that we could rattle off, for a CIO really to have structure around that, it goes back for me to governance. And then some accountability, not only for IT, but other business leaders, so they don't get all wrapped around the new shiny object, but they can get wrapped around processes and methods so that you can fast track, that language I use, but fast track some of these ideas and then measure them. What do we just do for the last 6 months around innovation? Let's look at these things together as the business and IT and what other organizations, third parties that could be called upon. Those are the ways that you start measuring, and then you have some stories that you can tell about innovation. The other piece, Melissa, which I've been less successful with, but the times are changing, and that's around keeping track of investments around R&D. And you mentioned machine learning. I did as well, blockchain. Let's even talk about a small health system. What could they do around blockchain? Is the CIO in the budgeting process putting some dollars aside for research and development? Is there some creative relationships that could be going on? There's just so many ways to peel this back, this onion, to get at the different layers of it. But I guess I'm confessing that in the past, I didn't really say, I'm going to set up an R&D function within IT in support of the business and have that funded, and when times get tough, not cut that, not slow that down. Don't slow innovation down because we're only worried about electronic health records. Said a lot there, but there's some ideas around how to make it real and not just a series of questions for CIOs, but what they can actually do with it.
No, thank you, Mark. Great. Good information based on your experience and your background. So I have one last question. You mentioned several areas, and I'll dare say the word, there's a lot of shiny objects, or phrase, shiny objects, buzzwords that are out there. We talked about M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and innovation, and how to balance that need for kind of what used to be called bimodal IT, which is moving now toward what you're saying is Gartner's terms, the continuous neck, which is how do you balance the stuff that you need to pay attention to, so sort of the routine daily stuff, with the need for research and development and focus on innovation. As you are consulting with executives, what would you say keeps coming to mind as their biggest technology challenge? Out of all those things that you've listed, what would you say is the number one challenge that you hear over and over?
It's how can I continue with the pressure on my operations, my budget, my staffing, the number of apps. Just went through an M&A. I had my apps down to 175. Then through M&A, it doubled again because we're on Cerner, they're on Epic. They have some legacy systems that are different than ours in RevCycle. I mean, the language goes on with acronyms and words describing the woes and the challenges for their current operations. I'm going to back up, Melissa. I think that IT organizations within healthcare today need to have a dual focus around the technology challenges that they're facing. One is current operations. That's where and you're probably smiling. It's not a big surprise that would lead to operations, but a well-run organization in IT can make magic happen for an organization, the business. They have the fundamentals down and they really are focused on their delivery, however it's set up, their products, however that's set up, their services, however that's set up, their budgeting, they know their numbers, and they're really focused on operations. The second one, and I mentioned a little bit about M&A and at times a gap, is that strategic alignment. If IT's off worried about machine learning, but the organization is more focused on consumerism, do those two tie over? If IT is really worried about cybersecurity, but doesn't have airtime at board meetings or executive meetings around cybersecurity, is there a missed opportunity for that strategic alignment? So there are two things that I'm really worried about. And I'll go deep with what you're just describing about the conundrum of this world. Is there's been a huge investments into electronic health records over the last few years as I've seen more health systems land in the upper end of that MRAMS adoption. What is that? EMR adoption method. The upper end of stages 5 through 7, and 7 is all electronic all the time. And then, but I'll say that about current operations as a challenging situation. That does sound great to be a 7, but what's the cost? What's the value? What do I do next? That next continuous, or the language that you use. There's huge implications to realizing the benefit of the EHR investment. Now they're not even, Melissa, they're not even called electronic health records. It's comprehensive health records, because that takes in clinical record, the revenue cycle, and population health. And that ties back to innovation, right? It started at EMR, then at EHR, now it's a CHR. We'll never stop. We're always going to continue to be working on this. You may recall a pretty savvy board member asked me, Mark, when are we going to be done with electronic health records? And I had to be the Debbie Downer and go, never, Sister Bernice. We're always going to be working on electronic health records because we'll have to innovate. Technology will change. There'll be sometimes a small wave of change, and then something will be disruptive, and it will just absolutely turn it on its head. So it's an evergreen investment. She groaned slightly, and she goes, now I get it. That's where, to me, dealing with evergreen investment that's strategically aligned, I think I'm going to anticipate what you might say to me, but I think the CIOs need to think through some things like, what is your governance and commitment from the org to whatever that trend or that technology or that investment is? Are you using a TCO to track costs and measure value? How do you know that you're getting the benefit and the value? If you had a board member that said, I think we did 2 years of work on EHRs, aren't we done yet? You're not measuring the value. How do you navigate shadow IT in this age where there's so many new technologies coming up, and sometimes the business hears of it first? Now you got a whole set of issues, maybe like, I don't know, ITGCs or controls. Or do you have them in place? Do you have any kind of vendor management? Those more questions back to the CIO. I think embedded in here are my answers. You got to do all these things from the CIO seat that would help you into the future. So, and I just talked about the continuum of an EMR to EHR to CHR, but then you got to think about your whole portfolio, the ERP platforms, the data platforms, your infrastructure platforms, your consumer platforms. It can be quite daunting to me to think about the impact of technology challenges that a small health system or health plan faces, much less the ginormous ones that are out there. So everything in between, how it can be such a challenge environment. That's one of the things that I use and still sleep like a rock. When you get to that question, what keeps you up at night? It would be to me about balancing that piece around being a well-run, focus on operations, complemented by alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. When you have both of those balanced and together, you're going to be able to bring in technology that makes this from a challenge to, I would never say a blissful state, but a better state than what you might be in today.